They want to eliminate all gas appliances so you're not cooking on stoves and ovens anymore. They want to limit your electricity. They want to limit your water. That's what sustainability is, reducing everything.
Hey friends, thanks so much for joining us. Hey, I have a very special guest on the phone. I thought it was time to get to the bottom of what's going on with Agenda 21. As we see drought in California, it's been my thesis that the powers that be are using engineered drought as an excuse to roll out UN Agenda 21 policies in earnest. And I've been following a YouTube channel for quite some time now. It's Grindal61. And on the line now is Gary Galino, who runs that channel, and he's definitely an expert, a hands-on activist in all things UN Agenda 21. Gary, welcome.
Hi, Sean. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. You know, Gary, just to get the ball rolling on this thing, it's such a huge topic, but I've been saying for quite some time that the powers that be are hitting American citizens from multiple vector points. You know, whether it's the pending economic collapse and the potential death of the dollar as China and Russia move away from doing business in dollars, whether it's the engineered drought and potential famine situation that we're seeing out in California, whether it's endless wars, unconstitutional wars without end. We have the vaccine situation. There's just so many ways and so many different vector points from which the American people are being attacked that it's hard to keep up. And I think one of the most important ones is Agenda 21, which you cover in earnest. So before we go down a certain track that I want to flesh out with you, Gary, can you tell me what you think is the most insidious and evil part of the UN Agenda 21 plan?
Well, the most evil, I don't know if I put a pointer on what I would say is the most evil, but what I would say, because most people, I'll put it to you this way. About a year to a year and a half ago, not that I thought I was an expert, but I thought I knew a lot about Agenda 21, and I really knew very little. And so people that do think they know about Agenda 21, there's so many components to it. So the way I would best describe it is the agenda for the 21st century for the entire world, and that covers everything from immigration to education to housing to the environment. You mentioned the drought. So certain people that I know, they like to say that immigration is the number one issue in America. It's the most important, and I don't particularly disagree with them. However, immigration is one component of the Agenda 21 plan, so everything is intertwined. There is a racial component to it as well, so I guess you could make the argument there. But I would say the most sinister thing about all of it is just the whole idea that, you know, I have them on tape essentially saying that they don't want you leaving where you live, and that they call it leakage. So in our city, they were complaining that they hypothesized that about $35 million was leaving the city every single year for people that were getting in their cars and driving to another city to, you know, have amenities that, you know, that the city that I live in doesn't offer. And, you know, they would go over there instead, which to me, that's part of the beauty of life and, you know, the beauty of having choice, that cities are different. Well, they don't want that anymore. They don't want you leaving. They don't want you getting in a car. And they want you living in these little tiny apartments where they're basically suggesting that there will be no family in the future, because if you have a 500 square foot apartment, how do you plan on having, you know, a spouse, a couple kids, etc.? So just the whole concept that they don't want you getting in a car, they want you living in a little box, probably by yourself, where you pay an extremely high rent per month, and if you have a job, your job is either on the same block where you live or in the downstairs floor of your building. So just this whole idea that they want all of us just in one constricted area, I would say that's probably the most sinister aspect of all of it.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And a lot of people listening, and even for myself a few years ago, I'd heard about Agenda 21, and I thought, well, there's really no way they're going to be able to pull this off because people will rebel. But of course, the New World Order powers that be, the banking powers that be, the UN, these people behind this sinister agenda are very smart, and of course, they are carrying it out, and they're carrying it out at a rapid pace. And meanwhile, the people at large read about it in the LA Times and they think it's a great deal. So you did this video called Warning, This is Your Agenda 21 Future with No Cars. And in this video, you outline an article from the LA Times. And it reads like this. In 2008, in LA County, voters approved a $40 billion fund for 30 years by increasing the sales tax by 0.5%. Most of Measure R this is what they approved, is going to fund new rail projects aimed at eliminating cars from freeways and roadways. And I wanted to read that for people because I think it's brilliant that the powers that be are able to pull this off. They're able to tax the people so the people will pay for their own future prison. And you say this in your video. Let me play this.
There is an agenda to regulate us out of our cars and into public transportation, and to also have us live in high density stack and pack type buildings near the public transportation. So this article right here is from the LA Times, March 13, 2015. It is titled "A Slow Running Nightmare, Pains, Strains, and No Automobiles." You are going to see what life is like when there are no automobiles.
Now, I think that's a very important point. I'm going to turn it back over to you. In the future, there will be cars, but you will have to be very, very well-heeled to afford to drive one. And they're going to eliminate your choice to drive for most people. So take it from there, Gary.
Well, okay, one thing I wanted to mention first, you were talking about how people, how they want this and they're paying for their own enslavement. What they do here in California when they want to pass anything through a vote is they will take an elected leader. So during the last election cycle, they wanted to pass this multi-billion-dollar water bond that was this horrible deal that's going to put us in more debt, that was going to probably make the drought worse because they take the money from us and then they put it in other places. Well, what they did to sell that was they used Jerry Brown as the selling point. Now, I'm sure if you live out of California, you're thinking, what an awful way to sell something using Jerry Brown. Well, California is heavy Democrat, and when they see Jerry Brown, all they see is the D next to his name. So if he says to vote for something, you vote for it. So that's how all this stuff gets passed. And it's really up to people if they really want to drive or not. You know, in my city over here, I'm having a really hard time convincing anybody of what's actually going on, whereas in other cities we've been more successful. And I'm at the point to where if they really want this, then they can have it. You know, I just want them to at least know what it is that they're choosing. And so what was the last question you'd asked before we led into this?
Well, yeah, I think my point is that in the future there will be cars, but you're going to have to be one of the elite to afford to drive one. They're going to be charging by the mile if you want to drive in the first place. And, you know, most people will be too poor to drive. So, yeah, a future without cars is a future without freedom. You want to go to Yellowstone?
Yes.
Forget it. You want to do anything interesting with your family? You can't. You don't even have a family. You're in a small apartment. Enjoy it. It's Rockefeller UN Agenda 21, and it spells neo-serfdom.
Right, and so what they're doing, and this is probably another very sinister component of it, and what most people don't realize is what they are trying to do is the economy that we have now, the industrialized, you know, trucks going up and down the road, delivering goods, they want to completely end that. They want to completely destroy the economy, and that's what they're doing with cap and trade and carbon taxes, and then through that, they're going to have what they're calling a green revolution. So the whole idea of the green economy and the current industrial economy, I do believe they could be together in the same world, but the problem is the green economy doesn't really work on its own. It needs a lot of government subsidies, and private investors are not really willing to invest in it to the level that it needs to survive. So they've realized this, so they know they have to completely take down what we have right now and then create this new economy. And so what they are doing is they're creating brand new markets. So with the high-density housing, what their end-game goal is to have everyone living in the same type of housing, therefore they will have a monopoly. Same thing with the cars. They want to get rid of all the gasoline-powered cars and only have the electric vehicles. That creates another monopoly. Now, you could say and make the argument that there is a monopoly right now with the oil companies, and there is, and that's why we see such manipulated gas prices. But at least within the car companies, there is competition amongst the different brands in different countries. You know, although cars overall are expensive, but with these electric cars, we have these Teslas, and if we end up with the future of only Teslas, where they cost $100,000, and you're charged by the mile, and you go in the toll lane, and they, you know, have whatever, because they have a gas tax right now, but they probably wouldn't have that with no gas. But, you know, all these taxes, it only will be the elite and the most well-off will be able to drive the cars. Meanwhile, you know, all of us, we're going to be packed on little buses and packed on trains and, you know, packed in these, you know, crowded areas walking around. And it'll be very good to drive in the future if you are able to.
Okay, so one of my thoughts is that if the median family income in this country for a family of four is somewhere in the neighborhood of $55,000 to $60,000 a year, the median family can't drive a Tesla. This green revolution is going to be carried out, I think, successfully because the people are asleep. And there was a Bill Gates TED Talk that's become very popular in which he was talking about vaccinations, but the whole point of his TED Talk was the need for zero carbon emissions. And the problem with zero carbon emissions, as you know, Gary, is that unless we get new technologies to replace the old dirty technologies, we aren't going to be able to afford energy. So I hear you, man. I think this green revolution is a Rothschild, Rockefeller, Trojan horse that will bring the people of this nation and people all across the planet to their knees.
Yeah, so, a lot of people like to compare America right now in its current form to the end of the Roman Empire, and there are a lot of similarities because if you look at how after Rome fell, it was a very, civilized, have high, levels of technology. They went into a dark age, and when I say they, I mean the people that lived, in the empire after the empire fell. They lived in a dark age for hundreds. I don't know if I would say over 1,000, but at least hundreds of years. They were in a dark age where there was very little writing, very little recorded history. I guess you could say society kind of went backwards, and they went the other way. Life expectancy went down because people, it was more filthy, and they weren't taking care of themselves like they should have. And that's what we're seeing now. Although there will be technology, you and I won't get to have it. So, the nice electric cars, the whole idea that, as I said earlier, the industrialized society, that includes electricity and all of the everyday luxuries that we take for granted. You're not going to have those. They want to eliminate all gas appliances so you're not cooking on stoves and ovens anymore. They want to limit your electricity. They want to limit your water. That's what sustainability is. Sustainability is reducing everything. And it's this whole religion and mindset where, you're a bad person, you're immoral, essentially, if you're using too much of anything. And so what I believe, and this is just my theory and hypothesis, is I believe they want to set up a system where you probably have electricity maybe a couple times a week. Just think of any of the worst third world countries in the world. You have no air conditioning. You probably get a bucket of water a day. You're not driving. You're either walking, riding bikes, and if you're lucky enough, you get to rent the bike. They call it bike share. That's another point that I'll make, is that this whole agenda is they're preparing for poverty. This is going to be a system of either you're in the system or you're, how should I say it? They're creating a system where you're either in the club or you're not. And most of us will not be in the club. So you're going to be too poor to own anything. You won't own property. You're not going to own a car. And as I had suggested, they're rolling out bike sharing right now, which, just through their own actions, that tells me that going into the future, people will be so poor that they will not even be able to afford a bicycle. So I guess with that said, it's just this nasty, horrific, dark age that they are planning. And I would say the closest I've seen it is the movie The Hunger Games. And one more quick point I want to make is you had said that you thought that the Green Revolution will be successful. And I don't know if it'll be successful or not, but what I've started to see is, like in my city, I can't get anybody to go along with what I'm saying. And one of the reasons for it is because they're not seeing it yet. They're seeing it a little bit, but they're not seeing it enough. Over in Huntington Beach, which is one of the coastal communities here, they also fell to this Agenda 21, but then they started seeing it. And they have all these buildings up all over town now. A lot of them are only half done. And that's when the people rose up and said, this is enough, and they actually stopped it. At least for now, they've stopped it. The empire is striking back right now, and they're suing, and they're doing everything they can to resume their building, but they did stop it, at least for now. So I think this is one of those things where people think it's a conspiracy theory when they don't actually see it. But then when they do start to see it, they see the big buildings going up. They realize they just lost the land on the road. They realize there's a lot more buses everywhere. That's when they start to say, hey, you know what? I don't agree with this.
Yeah, and thank God for that. There is a chance people will wake up and take action, but this thing is so far-reaching and sinister and insidious in nature that it probably will be hard to defeat. As you know, that when we do defeat these people in one area, they regroup and come back and sometimes rename things, and they just come right back at us from a different angle. Gary, I'm sure...
I don't want to ruin your thought. Let me interrupt you for just a second.
Yeah.
I actually still haven't watched all the tape, but it's something we've been suggesting talking about in my inner circle for a while now, because it's something that came up a couple months ago. But we had sandbag meetings yesterday, and Tressie and some other people went, and they've discussed this matter. I don't know if they actually said it or not, but this is basically the impression. We have been so devastating to sandbag, they're actually changing their name now. They're going to change it into something else, because there's such a negative connotation in the area with sandbags. So that's just an example of they will rebrand something if they feel like they start to lose. And we have an entire government entity that is planning on changing its name because of one person going around and asking questions.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to have you on, because you are making a difference. And I know you must get frustrated. One person can make a difference. Can you imagine if you had 1,000 just like you, out in California educating people? So why don't you just briefly, since you brought it up, just explain sandbag.
Okay, so over here we have, they're everywhere really. They're called regional boards, and sandbag, it's actually kind of hard to describe because nobody can really give a straight answer on who's what and who belongs to who. But there's a group called SCAG, which is the Southern California Association of Governments. They are the largest metropolitan planning agency in the entire country, and they cover the 6 counties of Southern California, which are LA, Orange County, Imperial, Ventura, San Bernardino, and Riverside. And then each county has its own council of governments, or what they call COGs. So sandbag is the COG for San Bernardino County. It stands for San Bernardino Associated Governments. And sandbag, like SCAG, it's a regional board. They're a planning and transportation agency. And the way they're made up, they are a state-run agency, and then the people that make the decisions, at least in terms of policy, are actually elected. They are elected mayors and city council members, and also all the county supervisors sit on this board. I believe it's 29 total. They sit on this board and they make policy for the whole region. Now, I did say they were elected, but they're not elected to sandbag itself. So you have like the mayor of Chino. He's elected to be the mayor of Chino. He's not elected to anything else. But they're all stepping out of their jurisdiction, and they're representing the region as a whole in this body. So what ends up happening is, let's say you live in Fontana, and the mayor of Chino, makes a really bad vote on one of their big votes, you have no recourse. You don't get to vote him out, and in most cases, you're not even going to know it even happened, because nobody's ever even heard of these groups. I only learned about them really in the last 7 or 8 months. I had no idea any of this even existed. And SCAG and sandbag, well, at least SCAG has been around for 50 years. They just had their big 50th anniversary party. And so all the big policy in the region, and this probably is going on everywhere in the country, but all the big policy in the region is happening at these regional boards. So in my city, for example, they argue about these wall painting contracts and trash contracts and ambulance services and, fixing potholes and, a lot of, things that are important, for a city, but things in the big picture that, that stuff's not going to get me out to a city council meeting. When that's on their agenda, I don't even show up most of the time because it's not controversial, it's boring. There's really no reason to be there. So my city is under the jurisdiction of SCAG, which is the overall, it basically represents LA and all of the region. And so, like I said, I told you what my city council does on the regular. Well, SCAG, what they're trying to do is they want to put boxes in our cars to track us and tax us by the mile. This is that whole getting you out of your car, making it more expensive to drive. Sandbag, they're putting toll lanes on the freeways. And when I say sandbag, SCAG is also behind us. They're just using sandbag to do it in that, area of the region. And so these major policies are being enacted by the regional boards, policies that affect everybody. So let's say my city's representative on SCAG says no to all this, then the next town over says yes, like I said, I have no recourse. And because it's so secretive and it is a shadow government construct that nobody's really ever heard of, nobody knows that this is even happening to us.
Right.
So it's that. I mean, it is a conspiracy. I mean, the city councils, they have had their authority stripped by these regional boards. My city is not going to have a hearing on tax by mile. And, if they really wanted to be fair about this, like with the toll lanes over in the Inland Empire in San Bernardino County, they would make each city approve it individually. And if you didn't get all the cities, you just wouldn't build the project. That would be the fair way to do it. But they pull the weakest person off of each council, have them sit on this board, and they're basically forced into voting consensus, as we learned recently. One person who was against this whole consensus, they're trying to throw him out now. And it was this big scene over at one of the city councils that we happened to be at. We caught it all on tape of him being thrown out of this, well, he wasn't thrown out, but they're trying to throw him out. And so I know I'm going all over the place, but, essentially they're taking these weak links off of these councils and they're using them to vote in policy for everybody. And nobody really even knows about it.
Yeah. Well, the reason I said that I think the Green Revolution, right, the UN Agenda 21 policies will probably be successful over time is because of what you've just described. People aren't aware of it, and even when you're active and trying to be right on top of it like you are, Gary, there's still things about it that you're not aware of, and even when you become aware, you're powerless to stop it because these people are reporting to the United Nations, essentially. They're reporting to Rockefeller and Rothschild. I mean, they're taking their marching orders from the puppet masters, and that's what frightens me about it. I think they're going to be successful ultimately unless everyone wakes up in earnest post-haste. And I know you've probably seen the simulated reserve and corridor system to protect biodiversity Agenda 21 map. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. All of these red areas are core reserves and corridors with little to no human use. All of the yellow areas are buffer zones with highly regulated use. And what they're going to do, as we said at the beginning of this interview, guys, is they are going to hoard us into high-density housing with no cars, and it will not be about quality of life, as these stakeholders say at the meetings. It will be about quality of place, meaning your day-to-day living existence will be dismal, and you'll be miserable in your little 300 to 400 square foot apartment, but you can go down to Starbucks or you can walk down to a movie theater and you can get out of your house and you can borrow a bike, and if you have a job, maybe you can put food on the table for your family. I think you're absolutely right, Gary. They are preparing the American people for poverty. And when this petrodollar dies, which is really my wheelhouse and the thing I focus on day in and day out, when this petrodollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, which is currently in process of happening, we are going to be poor. The average American will be unbelievably poor. And if you question that, look what's going on in Venezuela right now, you guys, as hyperinflation hits. And I think that day's coming for this country. I mean, the chicken's coming home to roost, and people need to wake up.
Yeah, and I know in Venezuela they have the government runs the supermarkets. It's essentially like walking into the DMV when you want to go grocery shopping. One thing I want to say, though, about what you were saying about just the whole misery of, being in these little apartments where you walk everywhere, is this might be the most sinister part. I keep thinking about what you'd ask. I didn't know you were going to ask that, but this might be, to me, the most sinister part. And that is, in this society that they are creating, you need to be able-bodied. If you are handicapped or, you have some kind of issue where you're not able to walk, miles or ride bikes miles or, wait at bus stops and then fight to be on the bus, if you're not able to do that, this system's going to have no use for you. And I've been connecting the dots with that this is what Obamacare is for. This is why we have death panels. And really, this is probably the most shocking part of it to me. You talk about mandatory vaccinations. I don't think there's even an argument that vaccines are not causing autism. I mean, the vaccines have exploded in number simultaneous with the fact that autism has exploded in numbers. And we have all these autistic children right now, and the numbers keep getting worse. I think it's like 1 in 68 for total children. It's supposed to get down to like 1 in 10 or something, or even worse. Well, there's going to be a day at some point in the future, maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, we're going to have all these autistic adults walking around, and how are they going to cope in this society if they're not able to do the things that I had mentioned earlier? And so, there's this whole talk about, right now there's over 300 million people in the country, and they want to get down to 66 million with 11 cities of 6 million each. And then there's also that, I think it's called Deagle report. I might be saying it wrong. I've never really talked about it much because they had claimed that there was going to be 200 million less people in 10 years in America, which...
That's right.
The only reason why I don't agree with that is, well, number one, I don't even know who they are, but number two, that's unprecedented in world history. I'm not aware of any time in history where that many people died in that short of a time. I mean, I guess it is possible with a nuclear war, but without that, I just don't know how they would pull that off in 10 years. If they were to have said maybe 10 million would die in 10 years, like even if they said like an extermination camps, I'm more likely to believe that than the 200 million number. But what I'm getting at is, if there really are millions of autistic adults and millions of adults with these other mental disorders, and they really do enact these death panels, and they really do say, oh, if you can't work, or if you can't, ride the bus, or if you can't ride a bike, we're going to put you to pasture. If they're really going to say that, then that might really be the way they're going to get those numbers down, because if you're, 48 years old, which I'm not saying is old, but if let's say you're about 48 or so, you're starting to break down, your knees start hurting, your back starts hurting, let's say you're riding one of those bikes and, you blow your knee out, they might treat you like a racehorse and just say, that's it, we're not going to repair you, you're done. And that's what sustainability is. It's about, sustaining these resources that they say are finite for forever, basically, and they don't want any extra people that they don't need using these resources, so they're looking to get rid of people any which way they can.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I want to just flush out what you said about Deagle, Deagle.com. That is a forecast that was made by Deagle.com, a drastic reduction in the population of the United States, and they went on to explain their position on this. I'm not going to read it to everybody here. You can read it for yourselves at Deagle.com, but I will read you a line or two, and it says, the collapse of the Western financial system will wipe out the standard of living of its population, they're talking about Americans, while ending Ponzi schemes such as the stock exchange and the pension funds. The population will be hit so badly by a full array of bubbles and Ponzi schemes that the migration engine will start to work in reverse, accelerating itself due to ripple effects, thus leading to the demise of the states. They're basically saying that a lot of Americans will just choose to get the hell out because the situation in this country will be so bad. And Gary, when you think about, again, the multiple vector points from which we're being attacked, we've got Fukushima out there on the West Coast, radiation devastating the Pacific. We've got the vaccine agenda. We have the Agenda 21 agenda. We have the engineered drought. We have the looming demise of our currency. These things all together collectively spell disaster. I can't imagine, Gary, what this country is going to look like in 10 years. It's going to be bad.
Yeah.
It's going to look very bad for the average citizen.
Yeah, well, one thing I will say, and I might get a little bit of criticism for this, but that's okay. This is just my own personal experience. I've been in and out of all this that I'm doing for quite a while, and back in around 2010 or so, I got into this whole gold and silver thing, and, I was reading about the economy, and, it was going to be a collapse and all these different things. And, I did what a lot of people were doing at the time and what some are doing now. I got very emotional. I reacted. I started getting prepared, stocking up on water, and just various things like that. And I probably wasted a solid 2 years of my life, thinking this was going to happen. And what I mean by wasting, my life is I passed up doing a lot of things that I would have normally done because, I just didn't want to go to certain places, or I wasted some time where I could have been focusing on other things than what I was doing. And I guess the point I'm making is, some way, somehow, we just keep chugging along. And I know everybody's talking about this September, a lot of things are going to happen, and I'm not denying anything's going to happen. But what I am saying is one thing that I have learned is that the powers that be and the Federal Reserve and the international bankers, they actually do have a lot more power than we give them credit for, because I remember in 2011, I used to read about what 2013 was going to be like, and I'm using that date very specifically. I would always read by 2013 X, by 2013 Y, by 2013, gold will be $10,000 an ounce, and there'll be no more dollar, and yeah, right? And when we got to 2014, I was that's kind of when I stopped wasting my time, because I realized, I said, there was no 2014. We weren't able to even make it this far. And so now we're in 2015, almost into 2016, and part of my, if you want to call it success, has been realizing that, life does go on, and, one thing that I know I'm kind of just going everywhere, but I spoke to a guy about 2-3 years ago, and he was telling me about what it was like living under Nixon, and he was basically saying the same things that I was saying then, people were saying back then about the petrodollar and the collapse and just all these different things. And that's when I kind of realized, I said, well, that's been going on for a long time. And I'm not saying that, there isn't going to be a collapse or a changing of the world reserve currency or any of that. I'm sure that will happen at some point. But I think we're a little further out than people realize. And there is all the communism, all the Agenda 21, and it is happening rapidly. I think life's going to continue, and I think, I don't think our lives will be radically disrupted, at least not yet. And I do think we have some time. I mean, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, dedicating the time that I have, if I didn't think that we had some time left. I mean, remember, in 2011, I thought we had 2 years left to 2013.
Yeah.
And now we're almost in 2016.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could have a good 5 to 10 years left and not even realize it. Because, I mean, back in 2011, if you'd have said there was 4 years left, you would have been laughed out of the room, or at least off the YouTube channel or whatever, and now we're here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I not that, I think you should be prepared, but I think people should have a little less, doom and gloom, and more, there is time left, and, use it while you can, because, when I go to city council and speak, I don't know how many more times I'm going to get to do that.
Right.
So that's just kind of how I look at it.
No, it makes sense. Hey, a couple of things. I empathize with your point of view on that, because you're right. This thing has stayed stitched together a little longer than even most experts had predicted that it would. I mean, nobody's more surprised than Peter Schiff and some of the other experts out there. But I'll say this, my friend. Going back to 2010, 2012, 2013, we didn't see China selling all of their U.S. treasuries. We didn't see Putin coming out saying he is now going to pass a law banning transaction in dollars. The Russians and the Chinese are getting out of the petrodollar, and when all those dollars begin to flood back home, it's going to cause massive inflation. And of course, John Williams, one of the experts I've been following since the time frame you mentioned, 2009, 2010, 2011, John Williams has been very consistent in his prediction for hyperinflation to come home to these shores somewhere in the neighborhood of 2016. He's stuck with that since then. So I know there have been a lot of predictions, but my money's on John Williams. We'll see hyperinflation of the dollar at some point. And but to your point, people should not be shut down from being active. Our only hope is that people are active, engaged, and take steps. Use your voice. Use your First Amendment rights. Show up at these meetings. Because if we stand down, they're going to win. So regardless of what the dollar does, whether it crashes or does not crash, whether it crashes in 2016 or 2020 or 2026, I agree with you. We need to maximize what time we have left. And I want to end with this, Gary. The Agenda 21 depopulation of rural areas will give Obama or any sitting president Stalin-like control over food. And this comes from our friends at the Common Sense Show. The plan is called America 2050, and the concept is based upon the creation of megacities. In order for the megacities concept, which is well underway, to come to fruition, American suburbs and rural areas must be completely depopulated. This process is underway, and the Obama administration is accelerating the process. And you won't hear about it from Fox and CNN. You'll only hear about it from Grindal 61, SGT Report, and our other friends like Truthstream Media, our other friends in the alt media. And that's the biggest conspiracy of all, Gary. You won't hear about this stuff from the mainstream mockingbirds. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, I guess one last quick thing I'll say is, you're right about China, you're right about Russia, you're right about, the possibility of hyperinflation. I hate to say this, and it's not a good thing to say, but I've just gotten so used to hearing all that it's going to happen, and then we just keep going along that I'm at a point where I'm going to be surprised now. Back in 2011, I would not have been surprised, if or when it would have happened. But the reason why I'll be surprised is because
for example, the stock market's been very volatile lately. And when I had that first big downswing about a week and a half ago, and everybody started going, "Oh, look, it's starting to go down," I immediately say, "Yeah, well, let's watch them prop it back up." And so I'll actually be surprised when they finally are willing to admit through their actions that they're pulling the rug out from under us.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it goes. And I'll tell you this, you did hit the nail on the head when you said these banking powers, these international bankers have a lot more power than we give them credit for. I do think that we were naive back in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012 to think that they wouldn't do what they're doing. For instance, just last week they sold in a single day 612 million ounces of paper silver into the market. That's nearly the entire annual production of physical silver.
Wow.
So they can do whatever they want to do, and because there's no recourse against their criminality, and because that sort of manipulation is mandated at the highest levels of the Federal Reserve, they get away with it. But they'll be able to prop this Ponzi up until the day they can't, and I think that day's coming sooner than later. But in the meantime, we all need to step up, and we all need to fight for freedom, because that's all we have. Once we lose our liberty, we'll be serfs. We'll be slaves to the New World Order. Gary, I can't thank you enough for your time, man. This was a really enlightening conversation. Can you tell people about your YouTube site?
Yeah, it's a YouTube channel, Grindall61, Grindall, and I put up about 2 to 3 videos every day, and it's a team of me and a few other individuals. We go around filming people, and if you can, please subscribe, because there's power in those numbers, and we want our elected leaders to know that when we walk in with our cameras that thousands are going to see whatever it is they said that night.
Guys, please do subscribe to Grindall. I think I pronounced it Grindall61, but please do subscribe to Gary's channel, Grindall61. I'll put a link down below here in the more information section if you're watching this on YouTube. Also, you can see it at SGT Report. And I can't thank you enough for your time, Gary. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate your support at sgtreport.com, thephaser.com, and thelibertymill.com. Real news, 24/7. God bless.